another tutorial on Windows PowerShell 7. I'm using Visual Studio Code, and if you need some help with setting up your Visual Studio Code, please check my previous tutorials. In this tutorial, I am going to introduce you to .NET functions and operations. Recall the get process built-in commandlet that I have introduced previously, which is simply get dash process. And if I run this commandlet, what that's going to display is the current processes running on your machine. It will display in a table-like format, and it will simply display all the processes right here in the terminal. Now, you can obtain the same information using a .NET framework function. To do that, we're going to start with a square bracket. So it's going to have a open and close square bracket because I'm using Visual Studio Code. And we're going to type diagnostic. So DIA. So diagnostics dot process. And you're going to put colon colon. And in here, we're going to put get processes. And then we're going to close the bracket. So parentheses. So we have diagnostics dot process and then colon colon and get process, and we're going to open and close the parentheses. And if I run this part of the code, it will return the same information as get process commandlet up here. So if I run this part, just display the same information on my terminal. So right here we ran the get process, and it returns a list of currently running processes right down here. And when you run the diagnostic.process colon colon get processes, it returns the same information as expected down here. Now, you may ask the question, if we have the get process commandlet already built into our Windows PowerShell 7, why would you want to use .NET framework function, which looks more complicated, to get the same information? The reason for being that there are, certain scripts and certain programs that you use at work that may be written in .NET framework, and using .NET framework functions in your PowerShell script will simplify things and maybe even run the code efficiently. That's the first reason. The other reason is .NET framework is older than the Windows PowerShell commandlets, older than Windows PowerShell itself. Hence, Microsoft has been working on .NET functions for decades, making it one of the most vital piece of frameworks with Microsoft Windows. So you may be able to do things that you can, with the .NET functions that otherwise may be more complicated to do with the commandlets back into the PowerShell. So those are the primary reasons why basically we use .NET functions. So again, if you have software that running on .NET framework, there are hundreds of them out there, you probably want to use the .NET functions to obtain that information. And the other reason is Microsoft has been working on .NET functions for a long time, and this may be more efficient than actually using the commandlets. I'm not going to go into details on .NET functions or how .NET frameworks work, because that can be a complete different series of tutorials because there's a lot to learn in .NET. But just so you know, this is an example of how to get the same information using a .NET function. So it's a get process commandlet here, but the same information can be obtained with this .NET function. Now, the information that displayed on this screen, well, they're not very useful, right? Because they're just simply listing all the running, processes currently on this machine, and the both functions, both the .NET function as well as the get process commandlet doing the same thing. So let's create a simple function to obtain more, some different information, and then we'll go from there. And I'll give you some, introduction to .NET. Functions using that, the function that we are about to write. to write a function on your PowerShell, remember you can do function, and then it'll basically this is how the function structure work. I don't need this param part, so I'm going to delete that. And on the function name, I'm going to give a name that is more meaningful to me, right? So I'm going to use get dash dir data as my function name, and I'm going to name it with a passing variable dir, and I'll explain what that variable is going to do next. So for now, simply I'm going to use get child item, because I want to know what do we have within a directory, and we're going to pass the directory information dir, and I'm going to use a switch recurse, and I'm going to pipe that information to measure object, and within that measure object I'm going to switch use a switch property length and sum. If you want to know what these are and what are switches, what are piping, and how to write a function and stuff, I have already explained that on my previous PowerShell tutorials. I'm just creating a function here to just give you an example of .NET functions later. So just keep in mind, if you want to learn these things, I believe it's tutorial number 17. I'll put a card in the top right hand corner of this video, as well as a link in the video description. But for now, just know this is basically a function that I have created. Now if I run this function, you'll notice this dir is not defined outside the function. There's nothing showing up. So if I run this function, basically it just run the function with no errors, but it doesn't display anything. The other reason is I didn't call in this function yet. To get calling this function, remember you need to you need to use the get dash say dir data, because that's the function I created, and that how you can call in that function. So this is the function itself, and I'm referencing that function up here. And there's a reason why I put it up here, because eventually I will be starting to pass the directory information. For example, right now if I run this, I'm going to lift a little bit high up here. If I run this, what's that's going to do, it's going to list the information related to the directory in which this is sitting, this PowerShell script is sitting, this command, the PowerShell terminal is sitting. So this terminal is sitting at C users administrator. This is where the terminal is sitting, and it listed information related to this, which is the count and the length, etc. Now if I want a specific directory, for example, I don't want administrator, I want the users directory, I can pass that right here, because this directory data has one variable, and that variable is now taking in this. And if I run this part right now, it will return now 917 here instead of 897, because this is not the administrator folder. Again, you can run the administrator the C users administrator folder either leaving this blank, or if you want, you can simply put the entire thing like they explicitly define the same area, and it'll return the same thing. See, it returned the same thing as this, as well as when there is nothing in here, it's the same thing. 896, you can see 896. So if you don't pass a variable by default in this function, basically Microsoft PowerShell, Windows PowerShell will basically pass the directory information related to the terminal, where the terminal or the script is sitting. But you can pass variables by giving that directory location up here. Now so this will basically returning the attributes such as the count and maximum and a proper bunch of information that related to that, because that's what we are asking up here. In most PowerShell scripts, what we need in this kind of situation is one attribute. So I don't want all of these attribute, I want one attribute. So let's clear the screen. So if I run this, it gives me bunch of attributes, but I want one attribute. So how can I get one attribute? What you can do is you can put dot sum, because let's say I want this data, that's all I want. So if I run this now, that's just going to return that number, this sum, because sum attribute is now being extracted out of this because we put dot sum right here. Like I can put anything I want. Like I can put like here count, for example. Oh, sorry. So if I say dot count, and if I run this, it'll return counts. Remember the count is 917. Sum is this, which is written down here. Now the problem with this is that this give up like this return, like if I put like sum again, you can see that it returns information in bytes. So if I clear this and if I clear again, just run. So see, it returned the information in bytes. Let's say I want to get this information in gigabit, right? So what I can do, I can take this information, this sum, I can put a slash in here, and I can put 1 GB, right? See, now it's dividing by gigabit, and then if you run this, it return how many gigabit of data contain the same information in gigabits. So this is gigabit. Remember, gigabit is not exactly 1000. That's why I give a dot something. Now, because the 1 gigabit is 1024 bytes, so it divided 1024. This got divided by 1024, and I display this. What if your script require that trailing numbers to be eliminated? Like I don't want these trailing numbers showing up. So in order to round this decimal, we can call in, like we don't need it, but we can actually call in a .NET function in math library. The whole point of I'm writing all of this up, this function, because I want to give you a quick overview of some of the cool things you can do with .NET functions. Now, what I can do in here, I'm going to introduce a .NET function here to round it. So I'm going to go square bracket again. I'm going to go math, because the library for .NET function can be recalled by this. So I'm calling in the math library, and I'm going to use dot dot just like before. But this time you're going to go round, and I'm going to open a square bracket, and I'm just going to close this square bracket back down here. Now if I run this, what will result in is basically it's going to end up with rounding this trailing numbers. See, it's round this 0.6 rounded, it's 1, but the rounding doesn't happen because of a function built into Windows PowerShell. The rounding happened because of a function within the .NET framework, which is coming from the math library. Like if you look at this line, you can clearly see this is the .NET framework, and it is not some kind of a round function a commandlet in PowerShell. So we basically utilize Windows .NET framework, Microsoft .NET framework, to do our work. Like we can do more things. Let's say I need more decimal points, for example, right? So let me clear this thing. So if I run this, for example, you're gonna get 1 because it's rounded that value. But if I want more decimal places, they say I don't like that, so I want 1 decimal place. I put a comma 1. Again, it's part of the .NET functions. If I run it, now we have 0.7, because instead of rounding to a no decimal place, is rounding to 1 decimal place. If you want like 4 decimal places or 3 decimal places, I can put whatever, like this 4 decimal places. If I run that part, it rounded to 1, 2, 3. The 4th decimal place get rounded, and that's the cutoff. You can have whatever. You can have 6 decimal places, as long as there are numbers contained within them. It'll just type in that out. So note that the trailing zeros in decimal will be dropped, right? So if you don't, like, the trailing zeros get dropped anyway. So it is another thing that you need to keep in mind when you're doing this. Anyway, I'm just today I would just want you to introduce you to the fact that you can use .NET functions within Windows PowerShell. So that's what I'm doing here. If you need some examples of .NET functions and some advanced examples and intermediate examples, I will go over that later. For now, just know that you can use .NET functions within Windows PowerShell, and in our future tutorials I will go over complex operation with .NET functions, and we will introduce you to some cool little small little PowerShell scripts. And until next time, please make sure to thumbs up this video and subscribe to this channel, and have a nice day.